Retro Cutoff. The last panel I did for Damien, it was like, this is post-lockdown, let's bring everybody together. And now I feel like this is going to like rip everybody apart again. And
all over again. You know, I like to impress people.
Yeah. Talking video games is fun. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, so we invite everybody to participate in that. Right now, we're going to jump in and start introducing all of the panelists to my left. Well, I'm Philip Kelly. I'm nobody. I'm just here to talk.
Philip, come on, Philip.
I'm on a different podcast. I don't know any of these guys. He's the host of the Clean Comedy Podcast and also a... What was that? Did somebody say something? Okay.
You can't talk to the moderator.
He's the host of the Clean Comedy Podcast and also a co-host on Making a Geek podcast. We have James Creviston. All the way down at the end.
Thank you.
How are you doing, James? Good.
I'm doing great. This is
Fantastic. Awesome. Next, we have a co-host of Retro Game Night podcast, Earl Lawrence. Known by many things, he hosts LA Fashion Week, a trivia master of pop culture, and hosts two podcasts, Retro Game Night and Making a Geek, Damien DeCarlo. He's a gaming aficionado and a co-host on Retro Game Night podcast, Michael Losey. Next, he is a professor of law and public policy at Pepperdine University. He is a Star Wars nut as well as an overall geek in all things in pop culture, Greg McNeil. And I think that's Pepperdine, isn't it? Yeah. It is Pepperdine, yeah. Slipped out wrong. He is a visual effects production manager. His works include Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, Zack Snyder's Justice League, and Free Guy. Michael Armstrong. Yeah, well, we are all happy to have Michael here. Yes. So we're gonna kick it off with a really easy question first. Well, hopefully, we'll see. Defining what the word retro means in the gaming world. Is it purely about the technology, or does it also encompass a certain gaming era or style? I'm going to open it up and see who would like to jump in with their profound answer first. Anybody down there?
Retro gaming. Stir the pot.
Retro gaming.
Let's do it. Okay. I'll volunteer first. I would say it's a little bit of both. We got 8-bit graphics. You get instantly transported to a different era. That's also to say that there's a certain time period where we didn't care about what resolution we were watching or what kind of graphics it was. So I would say both of those things, as well as just you were at the mercy of finding things out, i.e. Legend of Zelda. You had no way of having YouTube, so you had to just figure it out, as they would say, or you could possibly ask a friend or subscribe to Nintendo Power. So I'd say, yeah, I think that would be the best way I can answer it. I mean, I don't know, maybe Earl has a better answer too.
I think for retro, it's about the nostalgia of it, right? So like for me, my definition of retro would be the 18 and 16-bit. Depending on, I guess, how old you are or how young you are, it could be different where you never had played these consoles before. For me, it's that. I was young and was right out of school, and it's just that feel like you go home out of school and you want to play a video game, and for me it's the Nintendo. It's the 18 and 16-bit. That's my retro. It's the pixelated games. It's the sound that's so cheesy but you still love, and you hear it and you're like, boom, that brings you to a moment in the past. But that's all part of how gaming grew also, right? So there's also has to be an initial point about where you started off. And again, it's such a great, I think, the question that we have, or what we're debating, or what we're discussing today, it can, depending on where you're from or where you grew up or whatever, you may not have a certain console that someone may have played earlier, but now you can relate to it because now there's these remakes. So to me, retro it stems across all panels and all consoles, but mine would be, for me, the 18 and 16-bit gaming.
And I guess I'll jump in here, just so as my co-hosts went first here. This is kind of where I think I disagree with these guys, and I'm kind of glad we're debating this
How
today.
dare you?
Turning this mic off.
I know, right? Already, it already happened. But for me, it's not really about the technology. It's really about the time that goes involved into these games. in a sense, I think of it more as a gaming era. And so, yeah, there's all these different games that you actually are seeing, remakes of today. F-Zero 99, for example, is a good example. It's pixelated, right? But it's, is that retro? I don't really think so. And so I'm glad we're going to debate this today. And again, I think to me, it's really time that incredible. It's a generational thing to me, is what retro is. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to agree with everyone, so that's not very exciting. So I think the cutoff, in my view, is before the year 2000, or as the Gen Alphas and Gen Zs say, the 1900s, right? Which includes like 98. And I think that one element of it, at least technology-wise, is, are you using a cartridge or a CD, right? Which kind of gets us to around the PlayStation point in time. And but then on beyond the technology, I also think it's a concept that evolves over age, right? So when I was growing up in the late 80s and early 90s, what you would call a classic car back then was 20, 30 years earlier, right? Whereas now, what you might refer to as a classic car could be something from the 80s and 90s, or even classic music is Nirvana, right? From when I'm 47, so when I was a kid, it was the Beatles, and today Nirvana is as far back as the Beatles were when I was a kid, maybe even farther. I don't want to really do the math.
Please don't do the math.
I start doing math. I was gonna say, like, I think for me, like, the cutoff is like PlayStation, the original PS1, and probably the first Xbox. That's like retro because that's also childhood stuff, right? So you're like talking like late '90s, early 2000s, where you're getting that nostalgia that you have, right? And you're right. You're talking about like music, like. I think classic is considered like 15 to 20 years old is classic, right? Considered like classic rock. So now like that stuff.
Cut his mic off too.
I know. I'm sorry. But we're like same vintage. So like, yeah, stuff that like I listen to now, like I go listen to like if you go listen to NWA, that's considered like old school rap, okay? Like that's insane because like when I was a kid, like Grandmaster Flash, that was old school rap. Now like we're talking like games like the things that we grew up with, Zelda and Super Nintendo and PS1, playing Ridge Racer, the original Ridge Racer, and the original Tomb Raider, for even goodness sake, is considered like classic stuff. So, I mean, yeah, I'm glad that it's like, it's an era that we grew up in. I don't know what the vintage is of the room, but if you're near like your 30s and 40s, that's like your era. And, we're the generation that got Game Boys, right? And so that's all retro stuff. Yeah, there you go.
See one guy doing that for Game Boy.
That guy's super excited.
Got one. Look at that.
Who's a Game Boy fanatic? Like seriously, you got a few. All right.
You all belong in the
couldn't
museum, by
afford
the
one,
way.
Well, I mean, I agree with pretty much everybody, but I think for us, like just the whole notion of retro gaming is kind of where the starting off point was, where the technology we had at the time, what people have already established here. You didn't need the HD. You didn't need everything. Everything was new, and again, I felt like where video games had started off. And since then, we've grown and revisited, and the whole system and industry overall has evolved. So I would say, as far as retro is concerned, it's just the starting off point and what everyone, at least in this room, as for the most part, from what I'm looking around, can reminisce as far as what they remember video games being when they first got started as kids.
I mean, this does bring up a whole other thing, because I heard someone say vintage, and I would say in television, which I grew up on as a kid, that's now vintage. That's not even retro anymore, I'd say. But that's a whole other conversation.
You talk about like knob TVs, where like years where you had to hold it up, bro.
Yeah,
The cable box
it's,
had a wire, right?
Pong. You just have one thing, just move that little board around and hit the ball. So is there a specific point in the evolution of gaming graphics where you believe the industry definitively moved away from the retro aesthetic? And if so, like, why? Like, what do you think that jumping point was? Why do you think that was the change? Or maybe wasn't?
I feel this is for me. Okay, so this is a good question, by the way. For me, the PS2. I'll say why.
Okay.
The PS2 for me was the shift because we had it now into what could be more, I guess you could say, more fleshed out polygons. At the time, polygon was very harsh. It was really just sharp edges. and we had FMVs for the first time with PS1. Okay, we got that. And then PS2 was just, okay, let's put this all into a DVD-ROM, which is what that was. And then it became, let's really make this into like a home cinematic, experience. So I'd say personally the PS2 and Xbox.
Yeah, I can get behind that. That makes sense. Because, yeah, the Polygon age definitely changed a lot of the gaming pieces there. And we went from, again, like one of my favorite games, Ridge Racer, dude. I love that game on the original PS1. That was like my favorite thing to play. And now go play even original Gran Turismo, dude. It's not even the same. Like, we're talking a jump in evolution of gaming there. And yeah, dude, once you start changing the graphics from PlayStation 2, I agree. PlayStation 2 is probably the tipping point of where things go from Lara Croft having triangle chest to being full buxom woman.
Triangle boobs.
Dude, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not lying. Like, we all were like, triangles? What's going on? But like now we see a full-figured, full-bodied person in a game. It was
Where are you
amazing.
taking us?
Where are we going here?
Next up, Leisure Suit Larry.
Dude, that was
kinda-
that was
I
still
am
like-
curiously aroused. Thank you.
That was still in the late
kinda-
90s, bro.
I kind of think I understand where you're going with this, James. And one thing I didn't mention previously of where my generational gap was, but for me, it's the PS2, it's the GameCube, and the Xbox.
Yeah.
There was one specific thing that happened just over 20 years ago, and it was the launch of Xbox Live. And that really changed, I think, gaming in a big sense. It went from inviting your friends over to just meeting some friends online, right?
That's true.
And I think that's one thing a lot of the new gamers don't understand nowadays. And what I did also notice, though, about that 20 years ago was this open world concept. And of course, that was possible with the 3D polygons and all that, right? So we went from the 2D to the 2D overhead to the 3D world and then to the open world, right? Yeah. And I think that's really where that retro gaming cutoff is. That's happened, again, about 20 years ago. But if you're talking about graphics, I think that's kind of where you're talking about, right?
I always look at it as the graphic piece of it is what really changed and drove that. But I didn't even think about that. I want to talk about it later, but like first-person shooters, games like Fortnite, the open world concept, World of Warcraft, all that stuff definitely changed, and that would not be considered retro, but that's definitely a giant leap in gaming technology that we haven't got to yet. But yeah.
I think that just to center years-wise, right? It's I'm going to go back to my point around about the year 2000. I remember in the late 90s or mid to late 90s, I was playing a game. It was very polygon-based, but it was a game called Cyber Strike. You had these like it was almost like MechWarrior kind of Robotech stuff, and it was online, and that was transformational. I remember, I guess I was a senior in high school, and I was hanging out at my girlfriend's house playing with her brother and ignoring her. And it was so wild to be online engaging with other people. And that's a transformational moment. It's a technological moment too, right? And you were on, you dialed in with a modem, like a 2400 baud modem. I mean, it was
Now we're gonna
wild.
feel old.
Yeah,
Thank you for that one.
You're welcome.
Dial-up
You're
internet. Well,
Yeah, but to add to that, the retro piece, Doom, right? We're talking about graphics. You guys remember Doom graphics?
Oh,
you wouldn't have your Halo without Doom. You wouldn't have your Counter-Strike without Doom. It all starts with something. But I think when you talk about cutoff and the actual graphics piece, look at Doom back in the day to what we have now. I think that's where I want to say that's the pixelation of your Doom cartridge or your Doom video game on Sega was that.
Well, I would say that, but then you have games like Minecraft and Roblox, which is that same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like that's almost
They've
kept
adapted it now.
retro alive,
Yeah.
right? You know what I'm saying?
They're bringing it back.
100%. Do you have something? Come on, you got to add something to this.
Why you have to involve me? All right. I'm just up here minding my business, just agreeing with everybody. I don't have any revolutionary thoughts here. But no, yeah, just as far as the whole technology thing, I mean, I'm going to revert back to what I said before. Just, we got into gaming when it was at its just pioneering starting days, Lara Croft with triangle boobs and, simplicity. But I think originally there was a lot more time and investment put into the actual story of the games that we were playing. And then with the whole thought of online play being part of today's society, I think that kind of has changed things and has taken away the necessity for a lot of the thought process or the underlying story mode of the games that we were experiencing as kids.
No, that's great. Yeah, talking about story and actually cinematics, I remember Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 were like two big moments for me where I felt like an unbelievable shift, where it felt like I was playing a movie. They got Elliot Goldenthal to come in and do the film score, or the game score. He's a film composer. You know, there was just things like that that really kind of, I felt that shift. And it was really incredible growing up, seeing that occur.
So you hacked my notes. You
What?
Went, you went into my phone and hacked
No,
my notes.
I did not.
Literally
though.
verbatim almost. what I was about to
Really?
say,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, our next question is there a game that bridged the gap? That's where I was going with this. It was a nice little segue. Damien, would you like to be embarrassed first with the answer I just gave?
For me, and I don't know if anybody in the audience will agree, but when Mario 64 came out, that to me was like, okay, so we're out of this 2D thing and it's real 3D. It's not Marble Madness 3D or Dungeon Crawler 3D. This is like a true 3D experience. So I'd say Mario 64 was that one bridge that everybody collectively was just like, holy crap, like this is a real thing now that the Nintendo system can pull off.
That's a good one. Anybody else have a game that bridged that gap between 8-bit to HD?
I think it was Resident Evil for me and the 3D play. And not only that, you could save your game. Back in the day, if you're playing an old school game, you start from the beginning and you don't have a save. What I did is, mom's like, dinner's ready. I turned off the TV. The console was on, right? You leave the console on and it's just running. So by the time you get back, you're at the place that you had. Now that you could save, I think that's, and that allowed for this game to go have more levels because you were able to save at some point and not have to sit there for umpteen hours to just try to finish this game. But Resident Evil with the, had that really cool.
Or you
3D
could have got a
look.
Game Genie back in the day and just hacked it so you could save your games, bro. That was. You guys remember Game Genie? Who had a Game Genie? Anybody? Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
The first real cheat code, bro,
Who's the
was
cheater?
the Game Genie, bro. I love that game. I don't know. I was gonna say I think for me it was like Tony Hawk, like Pro Skater definitely changed a lot of things, and then the original Fable on Xbox, dude. I think that was like the game where I go, we've stepped into a new world. We stepped into a thing that's totally different than what we had before, and we're coming to a cinematic gameplay. Do you remember Fable? You guys, who played Fable? Dude, I love that game. You can still go back and play that game, and that game is as amazing as it was like then as it is now. Do you have tier one? Do you guys want?
I must have had the cool parents. I'm going to go with Grand Theft Auto.
Dude, yeah.
Yeah, you had cool parents.
Fair enough. You did have the cool parents.
In high school, GTA 2, it was like in computer science class, we'd finish our work as quick as we could just so we could play some GTA 2 after. And the next thing I know, though, again, it's the open world concept, right? And then once you got into GTA 3, it was like, whoa, this is a whole new world, right? And it was a cool world, obviously, and you got to do cool things with it. And it was that whole open world, the sandbox. How can I interact? And as soon as the ADD hit, it was over.
At the end there?
Michael?
You have Michael? You have
I'm like,
sorry to
yeah,
include you again.
Come on, buddy.
I mean, no, you guys already talked about the games. So I would agree with the Tony Hawk one. I mean, I didn't have many game systems growing up. When we got PlayStation, that was a huge deal in my house. And yeah, so Tony Hawk was really revolutionary in my household. Just all the different modes or the different gameplays you could do, like, going after the secret items and everything. Just all the additional features that they included in the game was just a huge deal to me.
And did you?
I mean, I'm going
Go
to
for
bring
it.
in some PC games. I felt
please.
like Wolfenstein was a sick game, right? It was, and you're walking through this world, and I was like, okay, I can kind of conceptualize how they made this, right? It's these series of mazes, and you turn, and someone jumps out at you. There was a little bit of blood in it, even though it was pixelated, which, when you're like a kid, you're like, oh, that's cool. I can't believe I blew that guy's face off, and I shot a dog, right? The
dog bark still haunts
I shot a German Shepherd, though, right? So I bet that would be infinitely playable now. And then at the total under end of the spectrum, though, because playability, I think, is really important here, that you can go back to it and pick it up. You can go back to like original Atari and play. Remember the game Combat, right? With the tanks and biplanes and like ships and stuff. And that gameplay is hard to master. It has no story. The graphics are not what it's about. It's like you have this stick and you're trying to get this thing to move correctly. And then there's like moments where you're invisible. So it's just this basic bunch of blocks on the screen. You're like, I'm just gonna start peppering because I don't know where this guy is, which is like spamming the keyboard in Fortnite, right? That's where it started. Everything was on the shoulders of combat.
Combat?
Yeah.
Combat was the beginning of it all. The downfall of society, yeah. So we're talking a lot about gameplay and graphics, all very important, obviously, to video games. But how do you, but storytelling, like that's become now a big part of it. How do you weigh the importance of graphics against other elements in gaming, like the story or these things like the open worlds or the playing online with a bunch of other people? Like, what has become more important to you over the years?
Dude, for me, 100% storytelling. Storytelling is the key to everything. You can't have a game that has replayability. That's great, but if you want to engage in it, you want to immerse yourself in it, it has to have a good story. That's what I don't play Fortnite. I don't understand the whole concept of like enjoying battle royale. It's like, dude, it's like, who cares? I want to be able to go through this whole experience and grow my character and grow my skills as I play. Otherwise, it's just, yeah, you can just spam over and over and over and over and over again. But then again, there's also this thing of like making it too cinematic, where you get like Call of Duty and like half the game is like cutscenes, and you're like, bro, come on. Like, I could just go watch Extraction 2 on Netflix if I want to do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's just play the game, right? You know. So there is a big piece of it. Without a good story, though, you don't have anything. Even the original Mario has like a story to it, right? Yeah. So like, one of my favorite games doesn't have a story, but it's so playable. Duck Hunt is like one of the best. Dude, I know.
Oh, there's a story. There's a story there. Kill that dog if you can.
Yes, everyone wants to shoot the dog. But like certain games like that, you could play over and over again without the story. But then there are games now where you play it one time and you go, I'm never going to play this again, right? But then there's games like Fallout 3, or Fallout New Vegas or something like that, where you're just like, dude, I want to go back to that world and live in that world and be in that world. I think that's the most important part of a game is how much do you want to be part of that world? How much do you want to be immersed in that world? If you don't want to be immersed in that world, then you're not going to play it that much, right? That's why games like you talked about playing like online, like World of Warcraft did well, right? Because you live in that world. You are that character for that time period that you're there. And that's the biggest point of games. Plus, games are supposed to challenge you. And if you don't get challenged, if it's just easy or the same repetitive task over and over again, how bored are you going to get? You know what I'm saying? So for me, it's story, though, over everything.
Yeah, I agree. You basically, you took all my words, but
Sorry.
How dare you? No, Metal Gear Solid 1, like you said. That to me, to this day, still standds out with the best storytelling, but the worst graphics by today's standards. But I will literally put that on a great high-def 4K TV, and I don't care, because I think the story is amazing. The voice acting, to this day, in 2023, it still stands out as just an amazing game. So I think definitely story is a huge thing. You can have, which we'll, I'm sure, get into as we talk further, but a retro-looking game, even if it's made today, with an amazing story, you do not care what it looks like, as long as it looks beautiful enough to look at and you are engaged to storytelling.
Well, here, I'll jump in real quick so the microphone doesn't get slid in front of my face again. But no, as far as, I agree 100% with the whole idea that the story of the game will undermine or will really dictate the success of the game. But as far as the whole notion of graphics is concerned, like using Mortal Kombat as an example, like that's a game that, while there is a story mode, people play the, matchup almost exclusively for the graphics, because the graphics have come along so far in the years since the game was first invented, and so now people can do the whole X-ray vision mode as you just completely demolish your opponent, and that's just a fun aspect of the game. So while I think the story holds the real key to the game's success, I think the evolution and the advancement of the graphics of the games have really allowed more games to come to the forefront and capture people's imaginations.
I'm glad Mike brought that up, because while I was listening to all these guys, I'm like, wow, did these guys never play Madden? Did these guys literally never play Flight Simulator? Like, that's I think that's the big kink in this conversation right now is, yeah, when I think of those games, I'm like, sure, you can play the old school Madden, and I think of that 20 years ago was the Madden 2004. If you're Michael Vick, everyone hated you because you had a QB speed rating of 95 and you could do whatever you wanted. That's right. But for those games, though, that fan base, that demographic has always been, they strive for realism. And so I think those are kind of those genres where you can't really go back to some of those pixelated graphics and, where's the puck on the screen? I can't see it. And, like, you kind of need some of that high def.
Dude, do you not remember like the old school football game that on Nintendo? The
Tecmo.
Techno Bowl? Dude,
Tecmo
that was
Bowl.
like the
Tecmo
jam.
Bowl
Like,
for the
you
win.
still can go back and play that. It's still fun.
Yeah, I feel like you can go back to some of the old school sports games like
Wayne
NHL
Gretzky.
hockey
Yeah.
95 through 98, and I remember there was a buddy of mine from high school called it the S shot, the bad word, I won't use it here, kids in the audience, but like where you could skate up and just every time you could score by having the stick hit the sort of the goalpost, but. So like a theme here, I think that I'm pulling out, if you'll allow me to, is that sometimes the storytelling is important for self-challenging and progression.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's about your ability to work the keys, right? The keyboard or the controller, and that crosses into multiplayer games. And I think when we look at the gaming industry, they've figured out that there's a hybrid. People want the storytelling and they want the multiplayer and your ability to spam the keys or whatever. So like Star Wars Battlefront, for example, there's a story, Battlefront 2 or whatever. There's a story and there's a game, right? And those two things are combined, as opposed to like Castlevania, there was just one story, you went left to right, or Zelda, right? And so I think it's progression, and then it's also skill, and a combination of those two are the things that draw people in and keep them coming back.
That could be a genre thing too, though. Too like a sports game is going to be like, you don't need a story in the sports game. I mean, unless you're playing like a WWE game, right? Then you definitely need a story mode, right? Because otherwise it sucks. But like if you're playing like Wayne Gretzky or you're playing like whatever, any sports game, it doesn't matter. But if you're going to play like a first-person shooter or some kind of like side scroller or like genre type game, action game, you're going to need a storyline. So yeah, I guess that makes sense. I can see where you're coming from there.
I think personally, Madden needs more meet cutes. I'd play a lot more Madden
That's
if that was the
new one
case.
with the Taylor Swift and Kelsey. Yeah, dude.
Just wanted to add, we talked about like story gameplay, Final Fantasy, right? The whole
Yes.
Yeah. Which one?
franchise, well,
Okay,
7.
yeah.
I don't know
Yeah,
which one
that's
you're
right.
talking about. So
That's right, you
7,
go right.
that game in itself developed, the fact that the gameplay or the storyline was so great, but it's, I don't know, for me, it's one of those, when you play it, you finish it. I don't know if I'm ever going to go back to playing Final Fantasy 7 again, but guess what?
Chocobo
Final
Racing,
Fantasy
bro.
8 will come out, or a new one will come out, and it'll make you want to play the next one, right? So
You're not going to go
Yeah.
back and race? Like Chocobo Racing over?
Chocobo Racing, yeah.
Talk about all day long.
Yeah. I mean, I go all the way back to Final Fantasy II. That was like my first real storytelling experience that made me cry while playing a video game. When those two twins turned themselves to stone. Anybody? Anybody?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Or did I just spoil something?
No, dude, you can't spoil
Dude, it's been 40 years.
Come on.
You can leave.
There was a weird point in time where, I guess we have to figure out how to place it, where, in the OG kind of really early games, it was about getting a top score, right? It was kind of that
Sure.
arcade thing. And then somewhere along the line, that ended, right? And you would compete with your friends to get the top score in Pac-Man or whatever it was,
I think
Galaga
they
or
still
something.
had it. I think it was Tetris, right? So Tetris was
Yeah.
they were going out, and I think they still have it to this day, where you try to get the highest score or person with the highest score. There's trophies that are given. That's wild.
Well, look what saved the video game arcade industry. A story-based
Yeah.
game, right? From all those high-scoring point games to Dragon's Lair, which I never played because it was too much money and too intense for me as a kid. But I'm going to combine two of these questions because I feel like there's a little bit going on here. There's recent games that intentionally adopt a retro style, and we see that a lot with indie games, this resurgence of that sort of old school feel. Do these games contribute to the retro vibe for you? Do you think they're kind of use a unique blend of old and new? Do they capture that earlier era for you when you play these kind of new indie? I play a lot of these indie games, and I find a lot of them very fun and well made. But yeah, let's jump down into the mix, please. Michael, you want to go first this time?
Go first.
All right, I guess so. Thank you. Well, yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't kept up with the gaming system too much these days. I feel like every time, the year rolls around, there's a new system. But I did get to spend some time recently up north with family, and so I was spend some time playing the Nintendo Switch, which gave me kind of nostalgia for the retro game to an extent. So I was playing, Mario Kart and Super Mario Party with my siblings and nephews up there. And so it's kind of an interesting mix. I don't know, it just, for me personally, it just gives me the feeling of nostalgia, just seeing like the idea of the game with the higher definition and the better graphics, but the underlying game mode is still there. So I think it's a cool way for kind of a new generation of fans to be exposed to games that we kind of grew up with in a better, or like the graphics at least is something that they're comparable to, and it's a way to introduce them to something that you knew as a kid and kind of bring them into that whole experience.
When you say indie games, you talk about like Among Us and stuff like that, because that's what I think of when I think of like a retro vibe indie game, and it's like a very popular game. I see my kids play it. I don't play that game, but I see my kids play that game all the time, or even like my nieces and nephews playing Roblox, or like. My kids even started playing The Sims, and I'm like, well, how old are you? Because like, do you guys remember The Sims? You were just like, what? Like, they're bringing that back, and so I think it's a genre that will always be there because one, it's not hard to create those kinds of games, so you can get them out faster, right? You don't need the best graphics to get to work. Among Us doesn't have good graphics. It's like we would all say that's not that good of a graphically game, even though you're playing it on like your iPhone or your iPad or whatever. It's not that great, but it's a fun game. And also, I think as you brought up, playing with other people is what has changed gaming, has made gaming so much more fun, right? Like, I do miss having all your friends over, ordering some Little Caesars and having like a bunch of like soda, right? And staying up all night and playing, Super Mario Brothers or Zelda or Karate Kid on NES, bro. I don't care what anybody says. Excite Bike, right? Playing all that stuff on there. Excite Bike. You know what I'm saying? Like playing these games, like staying up late. That was a communal experience, but now the communal experience is online and it's everywhere all at once, and you can play with anyone. You can be playing with somebody even like Australia or whatever. It doesn't matter. And I think that's the part that's made gaming get better. Not the graphics, not any of that other stuff, but the ability to still have community, because that's one of the last places you have community is gaming. I think we've lost a lot of community in places, and the best part of gaming at least when I was a kid, was being able to hang out with all your friends and sit down and pass that controller around and play those games together, So yeah.
Yes. Yes, by the way. No,
Sorry, I got all the stops.
Mic drop. That was. I'm so proud of you. I would say to recommend to even my co-hosts of the podcast, but anybody that has not played, play Octopath Traveler, play Axiom Verge. Those are amazing freaking games. This is like a throwback to Metroid, or we're talking like any RPG, Octopath Traveler that's worthwhile. So I would say going back to this, play those games, play the hell out of it. It's a visceral experience. It is something that transports you back, but it's fresh and new. It's not, something you have to hunt down that's over $100 because it's a collector's item, or have to dust off and play it on a CRT TV. You can play it on your HD, TV or your Nintendo Switch. But yeah, I would say those are what I would go. Answering your question would be the newer stuff that throws it back.
Yeah, James, I just want to say I think you hit the nail on the head on this one.
Thank you.
Yeah, he did.
Someone has to agree with you here, right?
Thank you. No, I
We
appreciate
can't
it.
believe he came around.
I know. He did come around. It's slowly happening.
You're right.
I love the progression. But yeah, Among Us is one thing I thought of.
Yeah.
Again, I mentioned F-Zero 99 earlier. My wife would hate me if I didn't mention Tetris because she's awesome at it and kicks my butt at it.
Game rocks, dude.
But there's one underlying theme with all those games, and you were just talking about it though, and it's the two-letter word: social competition.
Yeah.
We lost a lot of that in-person social competition. It's two words, right? It's a lot more syllables.
Syllables, bro. You can't.
It's a lot more syllables, but yeah. Anyways, it's the social competition though, and I think that is so key to the enjoyment of these games, and that is what they all have. Yeah.
Can I say GoldenEye? I mean, that
Yeah,
come on,
all
come on.
too.
Yeah,
We got
GoldenEye.
only one guy?
Odd job.
Come on.
GoldenEye is great.
Everybody else,
That was
yeah.
that was community.
When GoldenEye came out,
That was community.
That was like
That was the game, man.
I'm sorry, but I don't know if I completely agree with the online thing because I think that this whole couch co-op thing is something I still to this day wish was more of a thing, and I'm saying it's just more online. But like to your point, James, going over. Even a sleepover as grown man adults, like just doing that would be like
Wait, do
fun
grown
and
men-
just
do grown men
all
do
nighter playing a game that we could all sit together without having to be at home or at another part of the country. You could be hanging out with moi, and
I never get invited, so I don't know about that. Bro.
yeah. But a 4-player split screen, when I see that to this day, it just
Yes.
it's that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, 4 players.
Agreed. 4-player split screens rule.
Damien's a screen looker.
Don't look at my screen.
That's why you got to play Smash Brothers, dude. It's like you got to figure it out. Have fun.
Yeah.
I can't play Smash Brothers.
Oh, really?
I have a hard time keeping up with that.
Dude, that game is so awesome.
It's chaos, right? Anybody with me? Anybody my age and just can't handle it? Okay, good. I'm glad I'm not the
Kai,
only
you
one.
look like you would play Smash Brothers and kill it all the time. Oh wow, that's so long. All right, bro.
So all ages have issues with that game. Good. We just a couple more minutes here before we go to Q&A. So this is going to be a quick one because I got sick recently and I went back to play Zelda 2 and I was like, meh. And I played Link to the Past instead just because it wasn't as boring. And I love Zelda 2. I love Zelda 2, but I was not in the headspace. So does nostalgia influence our perception of retro games? How does it do that? Are we sometimes blinded by the fond memories of the past? Or do these games genuinely hold up in today's gaming landscape?
I guess I'll jump in it. Yeah, nostalgia to me, it's why we keep coming back to these games. We could, move on to the next one again when we were, younger and, there was the console wars and you had your PS1 and the PS2 came out or you had a Nintendo and then a Super NES came out. You wanted the new one. For me, I have family in the Philippines and whenever we got, my brother and I have an older brother, whenever we got a new system, my grandparents were like, okay, well, let's give your old system to your cousins in the Philippines. They'll enjoy it. They'll play it. And I'm like, sure, why not? Like that to me, that was that's part of just I guess either my upbringing or whatever. Like we shared it to my cousins who didn't have it in the Philippines. But I guess to lead to that, the nostalgia piece is why I have the Nintendo Switch because I could play all those consoles even though I don't have it, but I still go back to it regardless of what the game is, so it brings you back to that special time about when you were, again, you just got home from school and you want to play this game or you want to play it with your friends, you want to have the sleepovers or Blockbuster nights or you would go to Blockbuster and you would rent a game. And,
Don't make me cry.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Get your pizza, get your Mountain Dew, and you guys have fun. Those things are like cool core memories that I can say that I've experienced and why I still play certain games today because I'm like, oh man, like playing with my daughters now, these games, and I'm like, oh yeah, she's like, can you help me beat this game? And I'm like, sure, but the fact that she also wants to play it, which is cool. She's like, doesn't want to play all the other newer games, but I still love it, and I think that's really what it is, the nostalgia piece and just bringing that core memory out. But yeah.
I'll definitely agree too. I have a big problem with this on the podcast because if anyone's are here listeners of the podcast, that we give a lot of game reviews on Retro Game Net podcast, and so when we do this, I have difficulty with separating nostalgia with. Okay, but is it really a good game? Because after a while, I start realizing this game is kind of shitty. But I have such good memories with it that I will fight tooth and nail over how much I love it. With that being said, I think that if you can't get teary-eyed over a retro game and have it mean something to you because of nostalgia, then it may not be for you. It may not be something that you will dive in further because with nostalgic games there comes a lot of feeling with it, a lot of passion, and that's how the podcast started. It was just a guy that I knew, a buddy of mine, literally tearing up over a long story of his life with his parents and his brother committing suicide over the memories of a great time when he had a great game. And that's when it hit me, and I knew, like, this is an amazing idea to dive in with people, to talk about it, because it's not just a game anymore with nostalgia. There's a lot of memories and a lot of great things tied to it.
Yeah, I think you guys are hit. Yeah, just going to carry on with this theme, and I think with nostalgia, it really just comes down to emotional attachment, right? It's what does it bring back for you? I know for me, when I hear the Sega, like I get excited, right? Or when I hear
Sonic the Hedgehog, buddy.
finish him, like dude, I'm gonna freaking finish this guy, right? Like there's something about hearing certain things that just get you going, blood pumping, and gets you really excited. And yeah, it's definitely that emotional attachment, like you guys said, and that's I think so important.
I think there's also a dimension here of the more immersive modern game is. I think that on a spectrum, you're less likely to have the nostalgia because you're so focused on this is the flip side of the coin of what we were talking about earlier about being part of that world. When you were playing older games that we might describe as retro, on the other end of the spectrum, the things that we're talking about are the pizza, the gathering, the Coke or Pepsi, right? It's like that the opening scenes of E.T. where they're talking, where they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, and you have this sort of filter, like almost a cinematic filter, as you're thinking back and trying to recapture those motions, those emotions, right? Those moments, and then the more immersive the game becomes. If it's not social, it's difficult to almost picture what was going on in that time. Like, do you remember a Fortnite game from 2 years ago versus versus playing what was it, like TNC Surf Shop or something, right?
Oh, yeah. Good times. Good times.
No, that's good. That's
Day.
exactly right. Like I think like the nostalgia is like the biggest piece. I mean, I still own an NES and an SNES. Like I own both those of my own, dude. And I own all the games. And I have a PS3 and a PS4. Like there are games that like the reasons I won't get rid of those consoles is because of maybe one or two games. Like literally, there's a Beavis and Butthead game on SNES, bro.
I remember that.
I don't know how many. Yeah, dude. So many people don't even know that exists. There's a Spawn game on SNES. Okay?
I remember that.
It's one of the few reasons, and some of the Super Mario games, but like those are the main reasons I own an SNES. And to own regular Nintendo is for Zelda, the gold cartridge, which I own. It's like, yeah, like these are the reasons I own it. The love of that, the passion, the things that happened in my life at those time periods. That's what makes games stick to you. It's just like movies. Like those things will stick with you because of what happened to you at the time you were engaged in those events. Fire.
Always appreciate a good Beavis and Butthead imitation. But no, I mean, everyone's already captured this point. But yeah, as far as the retro games are concerned, it's 100% about the nostalgia, and just it takes you back to those memories, those times, everything that you experienced. But as far as like the question if the games hold up, I mean, you just have to appreciate the games for what they were. I mean, obviously these games made 20, 30, 40 years ago, and obviously the technology was limited at the time, but for those of us that played it at that time will always appreciate it for what it was. Obviously, I don't feel like kids today would appreciate the 8-bit games that we grew up on, the Duck Hunt and the Super Mario Kart and all the fun stuff. But again, yeah, I think that's what holds these games so close to a lot of people's hearts is just the memories, as everyone's already pointed out, just the game nights and what it used to be a kid and just hang out with your friends.
To be clear, we made it to the last 5 minutes before someone dropped a Kids Today.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, yeah, we
We're
did
talking about
we did
retro
well.
games. I feel like that's
We did
totally
well.
valid.
Yeah, no, it is.
So-
That's completely. I just thought we'd lead with it.
So we're gonna jump to Q&A now. Anybody have questions for any of our panelists? Oh, there's one.
iPad is great.
It seems like, and you guys kind of touched on it, but it seems like the idea of couch co-op is becoming retro itself.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's on its way out forever, or is there anything that the gaming community can do to like make sure that we keep couch co-op? Because I feel like it's super important.
Indie games, because I think it's really on its way out, as much as I really, really dislike it. I'm to this day, I mean, I want to introduce so many games to my girlfriend who has had a background in gaming, but it's more like new stuff that comes out. Well, I can't play with her at home on my couch co-op, playing the same game. I have to have 2 different Nintendo accounts or a PlayStation account. You have to play online. One that I think she would absolutely love is Splatoon. Like, I absolutely love that game. It is like the best. If you have OCD, that is an amazing, amazing game.
Yeah.
But to play it next to somebody with you is a little bit, you have to have another Nintendo Switch. You have to have a different account. You have to be online. So it's like I miss that. I miss the old days of just popping something in as far as a game and just going at it, you know. So I think to answer your question, I think it is on its way out.
I hope it's not on its way out. I hope that things like Dungeons and Dragons being popular again, or even Magic the Gathering, will bring that back to people where we go, okay, this generation, this is the thing that we like to do, even though it's not a game, right? It's not a physical, digital game. Maybe that'll bring it back to where people go, hey, we should all gather around and play this game. And you'll get those more four-person games. That's why I didn't like Fallout 76, right? You have to go and play. There's no one-player version of it. There's no way to co-op with it, anything like that, where you're just forced to be online. You're forced to play in a multiplayer world sometimes. It's not as fun. So I hope it comes back. And I'm hoping that you said, indie games will be the way to go. Or we just bring back a bunch of NES games.
Yeah, if you're a game designer,
Damn.
start
Yeah.
Couch Co-op Studios.
There
and
you go.
just
There you go.
crank out
Idea,
Couch
you heard it
Co-op
here
games,
first.
right?
Couch co-op.
Actually, I've come across bars that do that have the arcade bar set up, and they'll host or they'll sponsor game nights. So I don't know if there's a way for the game industries to collage with these kind of bars that are encouraging people to come out, but I feel like there's definitely a social media platform, or there's a way to do it, but there would definitely have to be a lot of effort put behind it to keep the whole gameplay thing going.
Yeah, the one game this kind of reminds me of, and I'm hoping it just continues this couch co-op, as you called it, was Mario Wonder. That just recently came out. It's the first game that I've recently started playing with my daughter, and I will say it's a lot more fun to play co-op than it is online. But they do have that online feature, though, right? And so I think the one thing, though, that we didn't mention that I think is kind of out the door, though, is strict linear gameplay.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
I think that's the one thing in this industry. Yeah, it's no longer existent. Everyone is ADD. They want to be able to, interact with their world, and so I think that's the one thing that's actually going to be diminished.
Interesting. Cool. Thanks, everyone. We have time for one more quick question, I think. Sure.
take a second?
At the back, yeah.
So, talking on retro games, there's also the new wave of things like a lot of remasters, remakes coming out. You mentioned before how there is Final Fantasy VII, and that it's coming out with almost a 3-part remake. What are your thoughts on that? Does that just diminish then what it originally was, or is that really bring into perspective the new generation to the games?
All right, I'm jumping in, boys. I have a major issue with what we just brought up. So, FF7 is one of my greatest games of all time. Now, when it comes to a remaster, this is kind of like my personal view with the podcast. I think that has to be a cutoff because we review a lot of games. So the question is what's a retro game, right? PS1 to me would be one of the ones that would still stay retro to me. It goes all the way up to 360, and the reason why I say that, Xbox 360 and PS3, is that we have so many remasters, remakes, that I'm not going to toss away my old Arkham Asylum on PS3. You know why? Because I loved it, and I still will hook it up. And if I still have that old CRT and it still has that connection, I'm going to throw it on. So therefore, to me, it becomes retro. I think to answer your question, I think it's going to continue to do that, and it really pisses me off because when we got a game back in the day, we didn't have to rely on download updates. We didn't have to rely on, oh, wait, we're going to change one little thing. I mean, you got it in the box, and that was it. So FF7 to me was a glorious 3-disc, journey, and I'm just pissed that this remake is just taking so long to get, multiple parts release, and they're just sucking more money out of me. I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop now.
You have rattled the snake. The snake is now rattling.
How do you really feel? How do you really
Let me tell you.
No, it's good.
Anyone else? Answer to that?
I'm always down for remakes because that means more game to play. So I'm not going to complain about it. But yeah, I do miss. I always love the original OG Final Fantasy VII. So, if they make them and it's still good and it's still playable and fun, let's do it. I'm down. That's why I want Kai Patterson to make me some more movies too. While we're at it.
Yeah, there you go.
Remakes always work for me.
Nice. Yeah. No, I played Resident Evil 2 recently, the remake, and it scared the bejesus out of me. So I'm incredibly happy they remade that. It was great. Anybody else answer? No?
We're good.
Okay. I think I think that's it. We'll go down and say where you can find us. I'm Philip Kelly. I guess I'm a comedian, an actor, writer, etc. You can find me at Philip Creates or Popsicle Pod on social media. That's POPSKL.
And I'm Earl Lawrence. You could find me on the Retro Game podcast and also on Instagram, Earl Lawrence, or Hey Earl Lawrence.
Hey. Instagram, Damien_DeCarlo and Retro Game Night Podcast.com. Definitely check it out. I think you guys might like that.
And obviously, I'm the player 3 here. You can find me also at the Retro Game Night Podcast, or you can find me at Monday night, the Golden Nugget Pub in Simi Valley.
Golden Nugget
doing
shout.
trivia.
Limerick shout.
And other than that, yeah, at Michael Losi is my Instagram too as well. So.
Gregory McNeil, you can find me on all socials at Gregory McNeil, or you can find me in the club.
Wait, 50 Cent? Jeez Louise. All right, you can find me at JD Creviston Comedy or at the Clean Comedy Podcast. I'm a comedian, or probably at a comedy club near you in LA or around the country.
Mine's pretty simple. Pretty much all my social media is just at SoCal Armstrong. And if you're looking for anything else, go see Hunger Games in theaters. My name will be there in the credits somewhere as visual effects production manager.
Thank you guys for coming out. Have a great con.
Thanks for coming out, everybody. Thank you. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you have more questions, find us outside.